everyone, and welcome to Killer Bites, a show that covers true crime stories in an easier to digest format. If you find yourself fascinated by the worst moments in history, then you're in the right place. Because today we're doing a recap on the Jonestown Massacre. Before the attacks on 9/11, the Jonestown Massacre marked the single largest loss of US civilian lives in a non-natural disaster in history. While you're probably familiar with some of the basic facts of the cult, like the compound in South America and the way they took their lives, not many understand the psychological manipulation and mind control tactics that went into getting Jones' followers to submit to him. No one ever thinks that they would willingly join a cult, but after we discuss some of the horrific ways he brainwashed his believers, you might not be so sure that you wouldn't have also drank the Kool-Aid. The Jonestown Massacre happened on November 18th, 1978, when more than 900 people agreed to take their own lives under the instruction of American cult leader Jim Jones. The tragic event occurred in a settlement in Guyana that had named itself, you guessed it, Jonestown. But in order to understand Jonestown, you have to go back to its origins and understand the egomaniacal man behind the massacre himself. That's right! Come on down, Jimmy, you son of a bitch. What the heck is wrong with you? So, Jim Jones was born in 1931 in rural Indiana. His self-appointed importance started at a young age when in the 1950s, he began working as a self-ordained Christian minister. He started working in small churches around Indianapolis and dreamed of starting his own church one day. In order to raise funds for his dream church, the charismatic Jim tried out some colorful business ventures, which even included selling live monkeys door to door at one point. That's not a common red flag you hear in most stories, but I think we can all agree that's a universal red flag, yes? In the mid-1950s, Jim's dreams of leading the sheeple came true when he opened his first church, the People's Temple of the Disciples of Christ in Indianapolis. Very clever name, I know. Most just shortened it to the People's Temple. Then in the mid-60s, Jim decided to move his small congregation to Northern California in Mendocino County. In the 70s, he relocated his headquarters yet again to San Francisco and opened up another temple in Los Angeles. After that, his followers were like, okay, this is it, right? No more moving? I really want to mount some shelves on my wall, but I swear if you make us move across the country again, then I'm not going to do it. San Francisco was where the rise of the powerful Jim Jones figure began to take shape. He started to gain favor with the media and public officials by donating to charities and programs for the needy, and also helped get votes for politicians during the elections. He had some pretty dope programs set up at first too. The People's Temple ran social and medical programs for the needy, including a free dining hall, rehab, and legal aid services. Jim's messages of social equality and racial justice were very progressive for the time and attracted a diverse group of young, idealistic followers who dreamed of doing something more with their lives and belonging to a bigger purpose. A good majority of his followers were in their 20s, which made sense as most young adults around college age are at a time in their lives when they're looking for a new sense of identity and belonging. Jones fought for equality and racial justice and wanted to build a harmonious utopia where everyone could work and live in harmony. Who wouldn't want to be a part of a bigger cause like that? And it's not like those exact tactics aren't still in effect today. How many DMs a week do you get from old high school friends involved with MLM schemes trying to get you to join their team? Because they're never asking you to join their business, right? Oh no, they've got a whole language for it. This isn't a business, this is a lifestyle. And not only that, this product absolutely changed her life and made her feel like she was a part of something more. By the late 1970s, the People's Temple had amassed an estimated 20,000 members. And like anything with a big following, it was starting to get some haters. Some negative reports started coming out about the man that was lovingly referred to as Father by his followers. Former members talked about how they were forced to give up their belongings, their homes, and even the custody of their own children. Some described more concerning behavior from Jim. such as beatings, lashings, and fake cancer healings. Jones was already a paranoid guy, and he always wore dark sunglasses and was surrounded by bodyguards whenever he went out. The negative attention was really starting to bother him though, so he made a plan to up and move his congregation one more time to the small South American nation of Guyana. Sure, Jim, we'll move again. Thank goodness you made us get rid of all our stuff, or this would really suck. But Jim Jones insisted that Guyana was where they would finally build their socialist utopia. So in 1974, Jim Jones and a select group of followers went over to the tiny nation to negotiate an agricultural co-op or an agreement of using the land. Jones said that the presence of his American temple near the disputed border of Venezuela would be an advantage to them, and the government officials agreed to it. Another reason he probably chose Guyana was because they were the only country in South America with English as their official language, and he also thought it was a small and poor enough country for him to easily gain influence over. In 1977, Jim and over 1,000 of his temple members made the big move to Guyana. However, Jonestown would not turn out to be the paradise their leader had promised it to be. So, I'm not sure if any of you have ever tried to build your own idealistic, socialist, utopian society from the ground up before, but it is not as easy as everyone makes it sound. Members of the temple had to work long days in the fields and were severely punished if they questioned his authority. He confiscated their passports and medications once they arrived, and the people were plagued by tropical diseases and mosquitoes. He also had armed guards patrolling the perimeters of the compound at all times, because, you know, that's normal. Members of the society were highly encouraged to snitch on one another, and were forced to attend these late-night meetings that would last for all hours of the night. Some of you may know that sleep deprivation is one of the major tactics used by cults and leaders to help break down a person's psyche and gain control over their mind, but more on that later. All letters and phone calls were censored at the compound, and the people of Jonestown were completely cut off from the outside world. By then, Father's mental health was in complete shambles, and he was addicted to various amphetamines and substances that he would use to help him stay up all night so he could ramble and preach for hours on end. I guess Jim also had his own throne in the main pavilion that he liked to sit in, where he would often compare himself to Vladimir Lenin and Jesus Christ when sitting there. Yeah, that's definitely the pair that comes to mind for me as well. He was completely convinced that the media, government, and the world was out to destroy him, and his paranoia was only getting worse with his crumbling sanity. Jim started to require all members of the temple to participate in mock suicide drills in the middle of the night. And you thought fire drills were a nuisance. When a US representative from California named Leo Ryan heard about family members reportedly being held against their will in Jonestown, he decided to fly out and investigate. In November of 1978, Leo, along with a delegation of news reporters, photographers, and concerned relatives, arrived in Guyana. Leo and his group were welcomed to the compound with open arms and big smiles, and were shocked to be treated to a dinner and night of entertainment and celebration from the town. The elusive Jim even agreed to meet with reporters, and everything seemed, for the most part, pretty okay. But when a member of Jonestown discreetly handed a note to one of the NBC News reporters, they realized that the commune was not as it seemed. The note read, "Please help us get out of Jonestown." But remember how everyone was taught to snitch on everyone in the commune? A child spotted the note being handed to the reporter, and as he was taught, he snitched to Jim Jones about it. Jim didn't allow the visitors to spend the night on the compound, so they had to go back to the airport for accommodations. The next day, they went back and interviewed individual members of Jonestown, who expressed that they wanted to leave. Then, Leo and his team, along with 14 Jonestownians, gathered their things and headed to the airstrip to leave Guyana on November 18th. While they waited at an airstrip in the jungle for their plane, they were ambushed by armed men sent by Jim Jones. The men opened fire on the group, taking out Leo, a reporter and cameraman from NBC, a photographer, and a female member who was trying to escape. 9 others were badly injured and fled into the jungle. Things quickly began to escalate, and that's when everything would go from bad to worst. Once Jim had sent the men to the airstrip, he knew his days were limited. Word would reach the States at some point, and then they would definitely send people to come get them, and he just couldn't have that happen. So that day, Jones told his followers that soldiers from America were coming to torture them and shoot their babies. He made an announcement over the speaker system asking everyone to gather in their main pavilions and participate in what he called a revolutionary act. He told them that the horrors and tortures that awaited them when the capitalist pigs came would be far worse than if they chose to take their own lives now in a dignified way. While many tried to argue in favor of their lives and suggested fleeing to the Soviet Union, a former therapist who'd arrived at the commune just 2 days earlier defended Jones and told them, "Let's make it a beautiful day." A former therapist. A person who had a degree in psychology, and he was on Jim Jones' side. Once everyone had gathered in the pavilion, large vats of liquid that had been mixed up by the town doctor were brought into the room. The vats contained a mixture of cyanide, sedatives, and powdered fruit juice. They were instructed to grab a syringe without the needle, fill it with the liquid, and give it to their children first. After that, the adults lined up to drink the poison-laced juice concoction, while armed guards stood around the pavilion with their weapons aimed. This unfortunate event was where we got the phrase, drinking the Kool-Aid. Not exactly accurate, because it wasn't even Kool-Aid. It was Flavor-Aid, the off-brand kind. And I know you're wondering, so I'll answer your question. It was grape flavored. I know, right? The worst flavor. When officials arrived at the compound the next day, what they found was unimaginable. Hundreds of bodies carpeted the floor, some with their arms still around each other. 47-year-old Jim Jones was found in a chair with a hole in his head, presumably self-inflicted. The official toll at Jonestown was 909 people, and a third of them were children. It was hard to fathom the sheer volume of loss from this event. If I were to list all of the victims' names, it would take around 15 minutes. Only a few people managed to escape Jonestown that night by fleeing into the jungle. And a few dozen members just so happened to be in another part of the country when the event happened. In total, only 33 people managed to escape. One of the most terrifying elements discovered from the massacre was a recording of the event that came to be known as the death tape. It's exactly what you think it is. A 45-minute recording taken during the final moments of Jonestown. Investigators listened in horror as they heard Jim Jones begging his followers to drink the concoction and join him in the afterlife, while screams and sobs from the children and the adults wail in the background. The tape is in public domain, and you can find it on YouTube, Apple Music, or wherever you get your podcasts. No, but seriously, it's legitimately accessible to anyone with internet access, and I kind of feel like it really shouldn't be. I highly recommend you never listen to it, but if you do, you've been warned. The worst part was that the poison took a long time to work, and its effects were incredibly painful. So while some were succumbing to its effects, others were beginning to panic and trying to get out of line. But it was either drink the Kool-Aid or face the armed guards. Truthfully, I'd take the guards. It's said that the poison took between 20 to 30 minutes to work on the adults. But like I mentioned earlier, Jonestown didn't just show up overnight. Jim used psychological manipulation over time to change the way his followers behaved and thought, and broke them down enough to ultimately convince them that choosing the end of their own life was a better option than the non-existent torture that awaited them. So what were some of these psychological tactics? Jim was inspired by George Orwell's book 1984 and studied the systems of mind control described in the book, borrowing some ideas to try out on his followers. One of these tactics was having his followers write down their fears and mistakes so that he could humiliate any of his members in front of the congregation if they chose to disobey him. Another tactic he used that many cults and religious movements employ was asking his followers to give up all their possessions. When he was first forming the temple, he often read passages from the Bible about Jesus' followers giving up their earthly possessions and told his followers to do the same. With no belongings or place to call home, they wouldn't have anything to return to if they ever did decide to leave the temple. By doing this, he was also stripping them of their identity, and the former items and relationships they'd once had with their things were devoted to finding a new identity with the temple. Jones also made sure to take one of the most valuable things from all his followers: their time. He was constantly putting his people to work, assigning them to do grueling labor and chores that kept them busy for all hours of the day. If he kept them busy enough, they wouldn't have the time time or energy to question or investigate for themselves. The followers were restricted from vacations, singing, dancing, and any sort of fun or leisurely activities when Jones was around. They also weren't allowed any TV, movies, books, newspapers, or media if it wasn't propaganda that came straight from the cult itself. Jim also used sleep deprivation to will his followers into submission by causing them to go into states of psychosis. I know I don't have to tell you just how important sleep is for you. You probably heard it from your parents all the time growing up. But many don't realize just how quickly we can go from tired to exhausted to sleep deprived to experiencing hallucinations and suffering a mental break from reality. It's a quick descent down a very slippery slope. Unfortunately, Jim knew this. Sleep deprivation goes all the way back to the olden days, and medical history textbooks mention using tortura insomniae on people who were accused of witchcraft to induce a mild insanity. Why does that sound like a hot sauce option at Del Taco? Can I get 1 packet of mild insanity and 2 of the psychosis Del Fuegos, please? Essentially, you hit a point where you become so intoxicated with sleep deprivation that you'll pretty much believe or do whatever anyone says. It's important to learn about and examine these darker moments of history to understand how we can avoid such a tragedy in the future. If cult leaders like Jim Jones and dictators like Hitler can study and learn about psychological tactics to force their followers into submission, then we can learn about them too, so we can recognize when they're being used on us and put a stop to it. Thanks so much for watching, and before we go, I'd like to take a quick moment to talk to you about an exciting opportunity. How would you like the flexibility of choosing your own work hours without ever having to leave the comfort of your home, with products that sell themselves? I know, it sounds almost too good to be true. But if you give me 5 minutes of your time, I'll explain to you that it's totally too good to be true. It's a multi-level marketing scheme. Run. We'll see you next time.